You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, ready whenever you are.
Sure. Thank you, Katie. And I want to thank you for reaching out to us to present. And I really appreciate it because the more we can get the word out about our work, the better, because it's something that does impact the whole state of Maine and the Northeast. So yeah, my name is John Daigle, and I've got my two graduate students who I've been working with for several years now. And we're going to just share a little bit of work, background work related to ash protection efforts, and also share some ideas how you might want to become involved actually with some of the ash protection work near the end of our presentation. And uh, also take questions that you might have at the end. I know we've left quite a bit of time at the end, so we're going to do roughly about a 20-minute presentation before we get into some discussion, which hopefully that will be good. So yeah, so this kind of organization, well, the Ash Protection Collaboration across Wabanakik, it's work that's really taken hold, especially over the past few years, as the emerald ash borer has been spreading throughout our state. And Al, if you want to go to the next slide. I'd like to show my grandparents who were basket makers. I grew up in Old Town, Maine, and spent a lot of time with my grandparents, helped them make baskets. And it's just kind of interesting, to spend time with them in the 70s and 80s doing this work, and then kind of continuing on with this threat to our ash trees and the relationships that many people have had. And I know for my grandparents, it was really important, both economically, supporting the family, and just as a mechanism for just family storytelling and just an important part of our lives. So with that connection, you can go to the next slide, Ella. There is really very important cultural significance to ash. And these are some of the colleagues that we've been working with. All of them have been part of the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance. That's an organization that formed in the late 70s and 80s to reinvigorate basket making in Wabanaki communities. And it was really MEBA that reached out when I was actually contacted the communities around climate change work to look at potential implications of climate change and how that might impact communities. And while we had some discussions about that, tribal community members also had talked about this emerald ash borer, and Tyler's going to get into this a little bit more. But they had heard from basket makers in Michigan, where EAB was first discovered, and how it was impacting their trees, and could see it maybe impacting their cultural traditions, and reached out to our basket makers here in Maine. And that's really what all started this work in forming collaborations, just finding out more information about an insect that would be killing, these ash trees. And again, it's really culturally significant, not only to the tribal communities in Maine, but for the Northeast. There's a long-standing tradition working with this tree, and the art forms that are created. There was a fabulous exhibit right in Portland just a few months ago, Jeremy Frey. And Gabe is his brother here, who's also working with the ash in this picture. Next slide, Ella. Also, besides the cultural significance, really what's been emerging, there's always been other medicinal plants that have been associated where these trees grow for folks. But as we're learning more about the potential implications of losing our ash trees, we're starting to see how it has relationships to other species. And it's not only going to be impacting the ash tree, but also other species that depend on, these tree species. And so that also kind of elevates some urgency and paying attention and maybe finding solutions to protecting our ash trees. in the future. So this is one study, that showed at least 98 invertebrate species. So again, as we learn more, we'll probably find more additional species. But again, the connections ash tree has not only cultural significance, but the ecological significance to other species is really important. So with that, I want to hand it over to Tyler, who can talk a little bit more about this emerald ash borer that really is probably one of the most devastating invasive insects to come in the United States, really, in the past couple centuries. So with that, Tyler, why don't you take over?
Great, thank you, John. So my name's Tyler Everett. I'm a PhD candidate in the APCAW lab group, and this is emerald ash borer. So we talk about that ecological and cultural significance of the tree. We harp on that because there's a threat to it, and that threat being emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer is a non-indigenous forest insect from Southeast Asia, and it was first detected in Southeast Michigan in the mid to late 90s. It came over on wood packing material, and since its arrival, it's spread very rapidly. Much of the lower 48 of the United States and parts of Canada have started to see really devastating impact from emerald ash borer. In some forests, when emerald ash borer goes through, you see 100% mortality of the ash trees in that forest. And the way that it impacts these trees, in the early part of the spring, adults will lay their eggs on the bark of ash trees. And then they'll hatch to larvae, like you see in the top left photo there. They'll feed underneath the bark, creating these serpentine-shaped feeding galleries, like you'll see in the bottom photo there. As the tree gets really infested, those start to overlap and disrupt the flow of nutrients and water in the tree. And in sometimes just 2 years' time, the tree succumbs to the impact of emerald ash borer. As those larvae develop, they mature and they begin to pupate. And that's what that succession profile you see there in the top. You see a larvae pupating to that emerald green emerald ash borer adult that emerges from the tree, leaves a D-shaped exit hole, and then the cycle starts over. And it's really rapid because our North American ash trees lack any natural defenses to emerald ash borer because they didn't co-evolve in the same system. Here in Maine, we have two infestations. I talked about it going up through Canada and through the lower 48. So we had an infestation first detected in northern Maine and then in southern Maine. The one in southern Maine is rapidly developing because there's more people, it's warmer. The life cycle of emerald ash borer is typically just 1 year down there as opposed to 2 years in the north. And then we also have lots of people moving firewood and infested material. And so you can see some of those detection dots on that map are isolated. Those are likely from the transport of firewood and create these satellite infestations. And that's something from the public outreach standpoint that we really want to harp on is you can't move firewood, even if it's dead standing in your yard today, it's best to leave it and burn it where you find it. Next slide. And when we think about this threat, its preferred host and the tree species that the APCAW lab group really focuses on protecting is brown ash or whizcook, how you would say it traditionally in Mi'kmaq. Brown ash is a wetland obligate tree species, the only one we have in the state of Maine. And it really thrives in wet areas. So if you're looking at brown ash, you're likely wearing your muck boots. It likes its feet wet. It's a floodplain, it's a depressional wetland, a vernal pool, a river terrace that really drives the hydrology of the site and then allows brown ash to thrive. We key in on different characteristics to try and distinguish between the three ash species we have in Maine. So for brown ash, one of the big ones is the leaves. If you look at this leaf here on the right, the midrib is that stem in the middle, and then off of it, because it's a compound leaf, are the leaflets. The leaflets don't have a small petiole connecting them to the midrib. They're directly attached to the midrib. And so that's unique to brown ash compared to other ash species. That's something we key in on. Next slide. And we also have green ash here in Maine. Green ash is the most common street tree. So a lot of the street trees that were harvested or are being harvested in Portland are green ash trees. Green ash likes the swale. So just on the periphery of a lot of those wetland habitats where brown ash thrives, you'll find green ash kind of intermixed. We key in on different characteristics for green ash as well. You can kind of see in that photo in the middle of the leaf, those petioles that attach those leaflets to the midrib. Because there's that little space between the leaflet and the midrib, you know you're not looking at brown ash, it's one of the other tree species. And so we key in on that as well. Green ash, in addition to being a common street tree, is also a good hardwood forest product for cabinetry and wood flooring. And so a lot of the research is focused on green ash and white ash because of the commercial value, and not so much on brown ash until more recently. Next slide. And then with the most commercial value, we think about white ash. White ash can be found on the landscape as these large, super overstory trees, which are important for songbird habitat and will have a lot of ecological significance. But there's a lot of lumber in there and a lot of commercial value. And so a lot of focus on white ash, from cabinetry to wood flooring to baseball bats. White ash has lots of commercial value. In addition to its ecological value. We key in on the leaves and the twigs, buds, bark of this tree as well. In the fall, white ash, it sometimes will come kind of yellow, but a lot of times it'll have this like deep burgundy color or purple color to its leaves. That's another way we distinguish them. Next slide. And then something you saw on each of those slides was the leaf scar. So after you cast your leaves in the fall, what's left behind is the leaf scar. And so this is where the base of a leaf would attach to these twigs. That's one big characteristic we key in on, especially this time of year when the ash trees don't have any leaves, is the leaf scar. Each one is kind of unique to their particular species. So that's something to also note. Next slide. And so we're really training up people to make sure they can identify the particular ash trees in their forest and identify these areas, because there's some work that can be done to try and protect them. One of the big things is just to continue to monitor for emerald ash borer, even inside the quarantine areas, just to add new data points to that map we were looking at. And you can do that with purple panel traps, green funnel traps, or trap trees. And these are just ways to detect emerald ash borer. We also do seed collection. Tribal nations are leaders in that effort in terms of collecting seed and other genetic material to look into resilience to emerald ash borer. And then we can do silviculture, so harvesting in these forests to promote ash regeneration, so that new cohorts, young cohorts of ash regeneration can be on the landscape to linger and protect the species over the long term. We also do biological control releases. So these little parasitoid wasps that don't sting, but are native to emerald ash borer's native range, where we've captured them, we're rearing them here in the United States, and then releasing them by the hundreds or thousands in hopes that they'll establish as natural enemies. A lot of testing was done to make sure they're host specific and they don't target some of our native species and cause more problems. It's always a risk, but the researchers looking into this effort say that those risks are outweighed by the potential benefit of releasing these parasitoid wasps. Next slide. And then from a cultural standpoint, there's also lots of actions being done to try and protect this cultural practice. So tribal historic preservation officers and tribal museums are archiving their own tribal artisans' art so that we have examples down the line. Tribal nations are continuing to do basket making classes to teach the next generation about this cultural practice. And then we're processing lots of ash splint material and storing it so that we have quality material over the long term to continue the practice. And then we're also, as foresters, natural resource staff, learning from the real experts and knowledge holders, our basket makers and ash harvesters. They know a lot about these forests on a deeper level than would ever be found in a webinar or a textbook like we're on today. And so we're working with them to make sure that their perspectives really leading the effort in terms of how to work in these forests and protect those trees. And with that, I'll kick it over to Ella.
Thanks, Tyler. I'm Ella McDonald. I'm a master's student in the APCAW lab, working my way up maybe to a PhD in the future, but really lucky to work with John and Tyler in the ash protection collaboration across Wabanakik. So Tyler talked a little bit about some strategies that are really fundamental to protecting our forests from emerald ash borer and climate change. And we at University of Maine recognize that there's a huge need to do outreach and education around these strategies. So back in 2022, John and other partners who started back with MEBA discussing around emerald ash borer won a grant to do further outreach and education across Maine around emerald ash borer. And that really is based on the recognition that 94% of land in Maine is privately owned, which is extraordinarily high compared to other states in our nation. So we know that we need to get a lot of people, different partners involved, such as conservation organizations, land trusts, and private landowners, because if it really was just state and municipal land and tribal nations working independently on solving this issue of emerald ash borer, it would really just be these very small areas, less than 6% of total land in Maine. But our collaboration really seeks to, I think, cross boundary too. So not just within these now political boundaries of Maine, but across all of Wabanaki traditional territories. So we try to work with partners up in Canada and Nova Scotia. We're working with the Seed Collection Center up there. We try to connect with basket makers in Odanak and Woolenack, which are Wabanaki communities also in Canada. And we do work a little bit in Vermont and New Hampshire on those ecosystems. But yeah, our work is really grounded in the 5 tribes: Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, and Wabanaki, and we try to center their voices and perspectives in everything that we do. And so our goal is with their leadership and direction to provide outreach and education strategies for communities and ecosystems across Maine. And so in 2023, we used grant money to create a series of outreach and education programs, and we held 6 virtual events. And one of them was a panel of different Wabanaki community members talking about the cultural significance of ash, which was really impactful, I think, for a lot of people. We had over 300 people come out to that one. And we also did a session on the genetics of ash. So there's some new really exciting research showing that, I mean, it's less than 1%, but some brown ash is surviving longer after EAB infestation than other trees. And there are some researchers in the Forest Service who are doing studies on this to try to breed a more resistant brown ash for the future. And then we also held 3 general in-person trainings. 2 of them were inventory trainings. One of them was a seed collection training. And then we held 1 seed collection training just for tribal nations. In total, over the course of the year, we had 914 people registered, so we had a pretty big reach. And then last year, our big push was to hold a conference to keep anyone who wanted to come updated on the current research and management strategies around brown ash forests. We called that the Future of Brown Ash Conference, and we hosted over 300 people at University of Maine to come and learn about these issues. And a lot of people came from Portland, actually. So it's great that we got people to come all the way north, 2 hours. And these are some pictures of our trainings. This is Tyler leading an inventory training. Both times that Tyler led the training, it was raining pretty hard, but we still had like over 40 people show up to both. So that was pretty cool. And this is our seed collection training. And we hope to do more of these sort of trainings in the future, and we're working with a lot of different partners to do that. The Forest Stewards Guild is doing some more outreach and education this year around seed collection and inventory. Maine Audubon is also going to do more programming around emerald ash borer monitoring and other actions that you can take. That's more down in the Portland area. And yeah, I will just say that we couldn't do any of this work without our partners, and we've also gained a lot more partners through this outreach and education program. We started connecting with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute on a lot of projects. So from our core of our partners of tribal nations, Wabanakik Youth and Science, Maine Indian Basket Makers, we've really grown out with the support of different organizations. The Nature Conservancy supports us in a lot of different ways with inventory and other seed collection tasks. Wild Seed Project really helps us understand how to grow ash out and is doing experiments with us to grow out ash. And then, of course, we're also trying to engage private landowners, and we have a lot of private landowners who are involved with APCAW, who, for example, offer access if they have brown ash on their land to Wabanakik harvesters as brown ash becomes more scarce, with emerald ash borer being on the horizon. And I'll just talk pretty quickly about some volunteer opportunities. If this presentation moved you and you want to take the next step and maybe help out with some of our research and our efforts, we're hoping to offer a lot of different things this year that can get people involved. So one of the things that you can do when it's kind of cold out or start to think about doing is going out into ash forests and just collecting data about ash forests. And we've been partnering with Gulf of Maine Research Institute to set up a citizen science inventory data collection process. And the website just recently launched. It's through something called the Ecosystem Investigation Network. And we co-created different data fields that any citizen science can go out into the field and collect. And this data will be really helpful to help us identify sites for potential seed collection, to do emerald ash borer monitoring in areas where there hasn't been much monitoring, and also to find potentially basket quality trees. And a component of the data collection is taking pictures of trees, which we're hoping to share directly with harvesters if it looks like it could be potentially a good brown ash harvestable tree. And for this project, we'll be tabling at the Maine Land Trust Network Conference in late April and handing out materials to do this. And we're also going to be doing some trainings in the summer to teach people how to do that inventory. And this is all really gearing up for the fall 2025 ash seed collection season. Ash seed doesn't produce every single year. At least for green ash, it actually does produce seed. For white ash, it produces every 2 to 3 years. And for brown ash, it only produces every 8 years. And so we never really know going in unless we're looking at flowering how much seed is going to be produced. So it's really helpful to have people out in the spring scoping for flowers and seeing if it's going to be a good seed collection year. And the Forest Stewards Guild is going to be offering some programs on how to do seed collection from start to finish and doing some seed collection planning. And we're going to share all of that information through the APCAW newsletter. But this seed collection is going to be really helpful for that project of breeding potentially resistant ash in the future. So that's a big reason why we're doing seed collection now, is not only to store it, but also to use it in collaboration with tribal nations and researchers to hopefully find a solution to this issue and keep ash on the landscape. And a part of that project too, that we haven't fully developed, but is to monitor for lingering ash. So down in Portland, especially in wild ash stands, if they are infested with EAB, and you notice that if the infestation has been pretty over multi-years and you're still seeing some ash trees showing signs of resistance, we really want to flag and keep monitoring those trees because they could be potentially a solution for this issue that we face. So yeah, those are some ways to get involved. And you can keep updated on all of this through our website. We collaboratively developed this website in 2023. It's hosted through the Maine platform, and we keep updating it with different events and research when it comes out. This is a QR code to access it. And our emails are all listed on there too. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. But there's also a lot of step-by-step guidance on that website for how to do inventory and how to do seed collection. So yeah, we hope that you'll get engaged, and I think that that is all that we have for you today, but here are names and emails, and I'll kick it back over to Katie to maybe moderate questions. I think we have a lot of time to do questions, so.
Thank you so much, all three of you. I think this is a fantastic presentation that I'm so glad we have recorded to share for future audiences. I know a lot of citizens in Portland and South Portland are really either interested or anxious about this issue, and this puts it in just such a broader context of how important this is. I'm happy to open the floor for questions. I have a few questions, but want to see if anyone from the audience has any questions for these folks. Yeah, Troy, go for it.
Oh, great. Yeah, this was really interesting. Thank you very much. I'm glad you shared things for people to get involved. I think that, as Katie mentioned, a lot of people will be very interested. A lot, Portland residents have been very, very concerned about the decline of ash trees in our city, and mourning the street trees we're losing, as people are really fond of them. I was curious if you think it makes sense for individuals, especially like small landowners, like urban or suburban landowners, to plant ash trees on their own property. Would that be helpful and make any sense?
I I think that it would be good if they're really special trees. You could probably treat those trees ahead of EAB, of course. There are treatments that really do a good job protecting trees of those that you want to save. But you would need to treat them, because otherwise, if you don't treat them, EAB is going to likely kill those trees. And those trees that are close to your home or other kind of place, you're probably going to need to take care of that tree. I think it makes more sense for replanting to be in our forest settings, so that less so around maybe people's homes per se, unless they have a small woodlot in their backyard, because I think there's going to be another iteration of EAB that will probably still hang around and attack those trees until we're able to kind of create a more resistant type ash tree. And hopefully that will happen down the road, and maybe those would be available for people to plant in their yards down the road, which would be nice. What I like is just trying to maintain a connection to the tree itself. So I really like the idea of treating some of our trees so that they're still in our environment, even in the city environment. I think it's important so that you don't lose contact to that tree in some ways. So did that answer your question?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I do think that's what at least our forestry or Parks and Rec team is doing. I know that they're removing really devastated trees, but also treating trees. And I do know that the parasitic wasps has been one of the attack strategies too. I have a question. So the emerald ash borer is obviously an invasive species. Is it attacking the ash trees because it's a prime host site for the larva? Do the larva eat like inside of the bark? I guess why the ash tree?
Yeah, well, it's it's an insect that it's had that relationship with ash trees in their other environment. So it is solely focused on ash trees. And one interesting aspect is the brown ash, we're learning, is really, really close genetically to Manchurian ash, which is more in China. So that of all the ash species, the emerald ash borer will actually target the brown ash more so than it attacks all ash, but it actually prefers the brown ash over the other ash trees, as you know. So so on one hand, it really brown ash is very vulnerable, but at the other time, since it's so genetically close to Manchurian, where it coexists, we really think there's hope of maybe finding a solution where we might be able to develop a brown ash that might become, more resistant to EAB. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is something that makes emerald ash borer slightly different than other forest pests. For example, Asian longhorn beetle, which is down in Massachusetts, hopefully not coming to Maine anytime soon, but that affects nearly all hardwoods and will kill them pretty quickly. But emerald ash borer really just likes eating ash, and that's something that a lot of insects do. It's called specialization, where they just have one species that they feed on and can eat. So thankfully, it doesn't affect any other hardwood species as far as I know.
Hmm.
Katie, this is Julie. I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it, Julie.
Okay. Excuse me. I know that they don't have natural predators. Is there any relationship between the emerald ash borer and the hemlock woody adelgid? Because I feel like they're both showing up kind of at the same time.
There isn't a relationship to the hemlock woolly adelgid per se. Hemlock woolly adelgid has been around a little longer. It's also spread a little bit slower. It's just seeming to ramp up, especially locally on the coast here, in the last decade or so. So they're not related, but they are both non-indigenous forest insects, and they are negatively impacting some native species here in the Northeast. So in that light, they are related.
I'll go with Troy first, and then Rick,
Okay.
you're up next.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Another question. I was, intrigued by your comment about the other maybe native insects that are ash specialists who are going to be impacted by the spread of the ash borer. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those other insects that are impacted?
Yeah, there's some generalist, so insect species that target more hardwoods generally rather than ash specific, that are going to have more competition because of emerald ash borer targeting all these ash trees. And then for ash specific, we have the red-headed ash borer, which is a really common uh, foam feeder in the Northeast that's going to have a lot of specific one-to-one competition with emerald ash borer because of this. And then, like that slide showed, lots of more generalists feeding insects, foliage feeders specialize on the foliage of ash trees, and they'll see a lot of one-to-one competition with emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer doesn't feed on the leaves for very long. When they emerge as adults, for like 2 weeks, they'll feed on the leaves. So it won't be immediate competition for the foliage feeders on ash trees. But as those ash trees die because of emerald ash borer, that's going to be a lesser food source for them over the long term. So certainly beyond just losing the tree, there's going to be these cascading ecological effects of losing ash trees to other species that interact with ash trees as a part of their ecology.
So sort of as a follow-up, what percentage of like is Maine forest land ash, or what percentage does ash make up of the forest canopy?
6% of our hardwood forest is ash, and then just 2% of our hardwood forest is brown ash.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I could add, but it is widespread across the state. When you look at
Right.
look at our state, it is, even though it's a small percentage as a to the whole, it is it's kind of widespread throughout our state. So it's a small part of the forest. But just to add to that ecological importance too, it is really so unique. If you are out in the woods in the springtime, when next few months, um, you know, one thing that you'll notice as you're walking through the woods, you'll be able to identify it also where ash tree is growing by just what's kind of going on in the forest, because it tends to leaf out later in the spring compared to other trees, which allows more sunlight to hit the forest floor. So that's why you see other plants that are growing on that forest floor, because of that sunlight that's able to reach that forest floor. And the other dynamic on the flip side, in the fall, it loses its leaves the fastest of all the other tree species. And those leaves fall, and they have less pectin, or just they tend to deteriorate and get integrated into the soil of the forest floor, which makes it a very nutrient rich for a soil, which again is attractive to, it just has the connection, and then again to other species that takes advantage of that kind of relationship. So so even though it's not a big part, it plays a big role, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, and throughout our forest land in Maine.
Absolutely. Rick, you're next up.
Yeah, thank you very much for this great presentation. Two quick questions. Maybe I might have missed this, but can green ash and white ash be used at all for basketry, or is it just brown ash? And then secondly, maybe more to Katie or Julie or Troy, you mentioned Parks and Rec. I'm just curious, like in the protected areas, like some of the lands that is managed by Portland Trails, those forests, Four River Sanctuary, and a lot of the other forests right here in the city. Can you just briefly summarize what actions are being taken? You mentioned a little bit about that, but a little bit more. And if there are volunteer opportunities, for people who live adjacent to those forests. Thank you.
I guess I can jump in a little bit about that. So I know that Mark Ryland, who is our city arborist, is doing a lot of work on the ash trees. And unfortunately, a lot of it's been removals. We've had a lot of street trees have been removed because of infestations. As Katie mentioned, we are doing the parasitic wasp introductions. And I know that they are doing many more things. And I think maybe that's something we can add more detail about in our follow-up email. We can touch base with Mark. And I know I think we have a link to a presentation Mark gave a while ago that we can also potentially share, so to fill folks in. And we can definitely see if there's volunteer opportunities to share with folks here locally.
Yeah, just to follow up on one of your other questions about the green and the white. Brown is definitely the preferred species for basket making. But we are, again, kind of working with some of the basketry harvesters. In some instances, it looks like green ash might be able to be used for basket making, which is exciting and interesting, because as it becomes a more scarce resource, we might be able to look at other ash trees as a possibility. Also related to green and white, I do know some of the parts of the tree can be used for handles and other pieces where you're not really getting it down to those fine weaving materials. So sometimes green and white will be used for handles that are part of baskets. So hopefully that helps answer part of that question.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to add, for South Portland, our parks department has removed a bunch of trees. I'm not sure about the wasps, but I can check on that further. I don't think we have any volunteer opportunities through the city. I think it's more through GMRI and their community science ecosystem investigation network.
Great, thank you both.
Yeah, I will certainly follow up with efforts in both cities. To touch on what Julie just asked too, I noticed in your partners is the Wabanaki Youth in Science. I'm curious what work you're doing with students or yeah, younger generations.
Yeah, I'll let Tyler, because Tyler's been working more with the WAYS program. Yeah, Tyler?
Yeah, for the APCAW lab group, Waze is a great partner. In particular, my project, I have a physical science component where there's a couple different brown ash dominated wetland forests that I'm doing some experimental silviculture in. And I needed a field technician to help with data collection. And so I was able to get my niece actually to enroll as a Waze employee. And so I took my niece out for a paid summer internship to work in the woods with me in data collection. But in addition to that, the Waze program has made it a point really to be at a lot of our events and partner with us, especially when it comes to seed collection and ash inventory, particularly on tribal lands. A lot of the tribal natural resource and forestry staff are well aligned with the Waze program in terms of getting extra hands on deck in terms of tackling data collection for forest inventory and rewriting of management plans, even sometimes some mapping help. So it's great because it gets tribal youth engaged in the natural resource space and interested in this field to go back to school or continue to work with the tribe. So it's a really great program.
That's awesome.
Yeah, just to add to Tyler's point, one thing that really excites me, related to our work is there really seems to be a shift in some of the research that's been done over the past decade, really now. But really, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of dead and dying ash. There's no doubt about it here in our state. But there is hope, I think. I think there's more research that's showing potential solutions, but those solutions are going to take time in terms of some of the research experiments. So it's really a long-term investment. And this really fits with the WAYS program because a lot of the experiments that Tyler's doing as part of his PhD, we really won't know the effects of those until years later. So it's really going to take, it's a really multi-generational effort when we start thinking about protection of ash trees and ways we do it and what works best. And, so it really is, involving the youth is so important because we need those future leaders.
Sure.
I will also say that the GMRI project started in classrooms. So last year it focused specifically on working with youth and getting them out, youth across Maine, getting them out in the field and looking at these forests too. So not only are people learning how to do inventory, but they're also learning about the cultural significance of these trees to people in Maine's communities. So that's a pretty exciting element too.
GMRI is a fantastic partner, and yeah, especially involving kids in classrooms. So yeah, that's awesome that they're also on that front, and collaborating with you guys. Does anybody have any other questions?
I was
If not,
curious-
oh yeah, go
Sure.
Brenda.
Yeah, I was curious. I know you mentioned that like there are some natural defenses, especially in like Manchurian ash, because they evolved together. And I was just curious, like what those looked like. I know you mentioned parasitic wasps, but I was curious, like anything else, like yeah.
Yeah, the primary defense that there is some chemical defense to lead to larvae mortality in ash trees, but it's primarily they'll kill off the area around where the larvae is feeding, and so that tissue dies, and then the emerald ash borer doesn't have anything to feed on, and so then it kills the larvae in that way. For brown ash, it exhibits that, like John alluded to earlier, but what happens is it's a little overzealous in its response. And emerald ash borer, for some reason, in green ash and white ash, it's like a tight serpentine pattern, but in brown ash, it's this larger sweeping serpentine pattern. So it's killing more vertical conductive tissue, disrupting a larger flow of water and nutrients in the tree. So then it, those two issues compound and it leads to mortality quicker in brown ash trees than it does in other ash trees. But I did want to mention too that we talked about natural enemies and how there aren't any in our region, but there are some native natural enemies of emerald ash borer. They're just not doing enough of an impact to really do a regulation of the emerald ash borer population. So there's a couple of native parasitoid wasps that can impact emerald ash borer. One that will take adult emerald ash borer beetles and bring them back and feed them to their young developing wasps in their nests. So it's pretty graphic, but kind of a neat thing. And then our biggest defense naturally or native to the region is woodpeckers. Woodpeckers can have a lot of impact on emerald ash borer population, but it's kind of late in the game, right? They're starting to peck at the tree and they do just as much damage. But over the long term, woodpeckers will be a big part of, maybe bringing balance back to this dynamic.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
I just wanted to mention too, the close working relationship we have with the Maine Forest Service and some of their outreach efforts. And again, some of the, volunteer efforts, if you're a cross-country skier or you like to spend time in the woods in the wintertime, in a month or so, you might come across some of the effects of those woodpeckers, and you'll see what's called blonding kind of occurring on some of these ash trees that are impacted, where the woodpeckers are trying to get at the larva underneath the bark. So you'll see a bunch of bark around the base of the tree, and you'll see kind of a change in the bark condition of the tree. And so, if you want to find out where detections have been occurred by just checking out the Maine Forest Service website where we have known detections. If you're in an area where, hey, there's no known detections here and I'm going there, I'm going to be walking or skiing, you could inform maybe of a new detection in those forest areas too. So just kind of being cognizant of your environment is another way just to be involved.
This is fantastic. Yeah, thank you for bringing out so many, I think, participatory actions that people can take, some of them are even enjoyable if you're just walking through the woods in the wintertime. Anyone have any questions? I will happily send out a follow-up email to all the folks who registered and post this recording online on our YouTube. So it's easily accessible through our YouTube channel or our oneclimatefuture.org website. And yeah, I really want to thank you, John, Tyler, and Ella. This was a fantastic presentation. And yeah, I really hope it helps spread the word about the just outstanding work you're doing.
Thank you for having us. Thanks for everyone attending.
Yeah, thank you for all being here on a Friday morning.
Yeah, thanks so much,
Absolutely.
everybody.
Thank you. Have a great Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, folks.